This is the London Fintech Podcast, bringing you practical insights and approaches, stories and inspiration from the innovators who are building the new world of financial services. This podcast is brought to you by NextWave, strategy specialists and solutions for financial institutions. Welcome to London Fintech Podcast. This show is all about stories of growth and innovation in the world of finance and technology. On today's show, we're going to be talking about payments, a small topic. I'm delighted to be joined by Pete Wickes, the General Manager EMEA for Worldpay. They're one of the world's largest payments providers. They process 40 billion transactions annually. They operate in 146 countries and principally work with the merchant networks. So that's the acquiring side of the payments ecosystem that we're going to talk about a bit more in a few minutes. And Worldpay provide payment solutions for every size and shape of business. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you. Cheers, Tony. Pleasure to talk to you today. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, good to have you on the show. So before we dive into payments, technology and innovation, can you perhaps just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a bit about your career journey and how you ended up doing what you're doing here with Worldpay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so I'm Pete. This is my 25th year in payments. So it's definitely still not an expert though, right? I'd hasten to add. So I started off my career in the early 1990s in banking. At the back end of the century, someone said to me, "Oh, you really want to get into this payments gig? We think it's going to be the future." There was obviously still in those days, most transactions were still cash and cards. We didn't even have chip and pin in those days. Someone suggested to me, "Perhaps you want to get into payments." So I did. I started my career and I was basically selling to merchants, card terminal machines. There wasn't even e-commerce transaction in those days. So I was doing a bit of that, basically worked my way through the career, found that it was something that was really interesting to me. That, yeah, to my point, you can never be fully an expert in payments. You can know a lot, but because of the amount of change we see in the industry, no one's ever fully an expert. And so my career's developed. I joined Worldpay in 2011. Been there now, it's my 14th year. We're about to go through our 7 different owners. So lots of change in the payments industry ecosystem. And it's something that, on my entire journey, the things that have kept me excited about it are, one, the amount of change, the amount of innovation, and thirdly, the amount of great people that you get to work with in the industry.
And it is a sector that's continually evolving and reinventing itself. So I get the point about, continuous learning journey. And 14 years with Worldpay, you would have seen a lot of things change over that time. So we're going to come back to that and we're going to talk all about payments and the different players and the markets in just a few minutes. Just to sort of go off topic for a second, I tend to do this at the start of these conversations when you're not focusing on the global payments industry and your opportunity. Anything that's top of your hobby list, Pete?
Yeah, no, family is really important to me. I have a wife and 3 children, so they keep me occupied most of my weekends. And then my second biggest passion is football. So big football fan. You may be able to slightly see the shirts behind me. So Ronaldo and I've got Messi. And so I'm a big football fan. My football team, unfortunately, isn't as good as the teams that those guys played for. So I support a championship club in Watford, who I've been supporting now for 44 years. So that keeps me very interested. Both of my sons have followed me on that journey. And even my daughter now is trying to come on that journey with us as well. So big football fan, travelling, all the other things that people will say to you. But football is my main passion outside of my family.
Wow. I'm not a football fan, so I'm not going to pretend I fully understand that. But I understand that, sort of runs right through the stick of rock. I think the two players you mentioned that are on the wall, my youngest son would be very interested in, but the local club dynamic, I think you sort of either have it in the blood or you don't.
Yeah, you can't lose it. And a lot of people say to me, "Well, don't your sons just want to support Man City or Liverpool or something like that?" Well, so they didn't have any choice, and they didn't have any choice. And if they decided to, they'd have to move out of my house. So yeah, it's stuck with them now, and hopefully their children, if they have some in the future, will also follow Watford, and it will go through a big generation in the Wickes family.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're here to talk about payments rather than football, but they're both pretty global. So Worldpay is operating across the world. Are you traveling a lot?
I do. I go through fits and starts, I would say, Tony, to be honest with you. I mean, last week I was in the Middle East, so I did a bit of a tour. We're in the UAE, we're in Qatar, seeing some clients, but also seeing some diplomatic figures, particularly in the UAE. In that market, it's all about growth right now. We're seeing international companies wanting to put their headquarters in Dubai. There's a lot of investment going into the country. And what that means for payments is there's a lot of change, a lot of innovation, different payment methods being introduced into local markets. So I do quite a lot of traveling, but my role is covering the whole of the EMEA region. So I'm mainly in the UK, Europe, and the Middle East. And when I tend to go to the Middle East, I try and make a whole week of it, because otherwise the jet lag catches up with you, and you don't actually get to see all the people that you really need to see. So quite a bit of traveling, but not as much as some of my other colleagues that do similar roles.
Yeah, I think if you were on the rotation for the whole Worldpay footprint, you wouldn't be spending any time outside of an Airbus or a hotel. So it's important to break it up a bit. Okay, so let's talk about the payment landscape for a bit, if we could. It's a complex industry, and as we noted a minute ago, innovating all the time. There are lots of different players. My research ahead of this conversation indicates there may be 2,000 payments providers in the UK. I know there's around 500 in the US Electronic Transaction Association, and there's a market out there that's estimated to double to 150 billion of transaction volumes by 2030. I think the overall e-commerce numbers are even bigger, but looking across the sector, there are cardholders, issuers, acquirers, payment processors, and networks all involved, which even for those who are sort of involved or observers on the industry is quite a lot to think about. So perhaps you could have a go at explaining, how does the market work in simple terms, and what's the consumer journey across a network for a typical purchase?
Yeah, great question, Tony. And you're right, it absolutely is complex. And it's probably, I would argue, that it's changed more in the last sort of 5 years than it had changed in the previous 20. And the market's become, there's more and more innovation and more innovators in the market, more new startups. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on. But if you think about when I started in payments in 2000, I was taught the four-party model. So I was taught about the consumer or the card holder. I was taught about the merchant or the retailer. I was taught about the issuer, so the issuing bank, whether it be credit or debit card. And then I was taught about the schemes, so Visa and MasterCard, and the schemes and the role they had to play. So all four parts of the ecosystem don't function without each other, really. So if you think about how a transaction works, the consumer goes into the shop, they maybe tap in with Apple Pay, and maybe tap in with credit card, debit card. They may just be inserting their card to do an old-fashioned chip and pin transaction. When they put their card details in, basically the merchant is then sending those details of that transaction to the acquirer, so in this case Worldpay. Worldpay is then sending that transaction to Visa and MasterCard, who are then doing their own fraud control checks on that transaction before they're sending it to the issuer. And then the issuer will get the right of say on, is that transaction approved for Tony or for Peter? They've got the money, it doesn't look like a fraudulent transaction, and it goes all the way back through to the merchant. And if you think about that, that's happening in milliseconds. It's happening in milliseconds, particularly in a point of sale environment where you're so used to tapping your phone or tapping your card. And so that ecosystem has been around ever since it was invented back in the 1990s. It hasn't really changed. What's changed is what else is happening around the industry, whether they're the new payment types, the new payment methods, etc. So that's what's changing. But the fundamentals of it, how a transaction, when it relates to a credit or debit card, are still the same as they were back in the 1990s.
And is Worldpay an acquirer in that context? Are you also a payments processor? I mean, sort of how far across?
Yeah. So we're more of a traditional acquirer. So we started out back in the 1990s. We were the first international acquirer for one of the biggest airlines in the world. And so we would deem ourselves as an acquirer, but also now a payment service provider. So we're providing both the acquiring of that transaction, but also provide the software for both card present and for card not present transactions. Many of the newer companies now are just doing e-com, so they do lots and lots of e-com transactions. So there'll be the PSP, so where you enter your card details onto the payment page, and then there'll be the acquirer as well. So we do both. We can be the acquirer in the transaction, but we can also be the payment service provider as well.
Okay, so that's a really useful distinction. And for the merchant, so the retailer in this model, do they presumably have a choice? They could do a deal and take the API, the integration from a Visa and a MasterCard and Apple Pay separately, or they could come to Worldpay or your equivalent and get all of those channels in one interface. Is that? Is that
Yeah,
fair? Is
so
that
really the merchant wouldn't normally go to Visa or MasterCard. The merchant will come to an acquirer or a PSP or someone that does both.
Yeah.
So they would, in historically, they would go to their bank. So they would go to their bank, they would have a bank account, a business bank account, and they'd say to their bank manager, well, we want to take payments. And then that would be facilitated through whoever was their partner for that. And many of the banks, not just in the UK, but still have their own acquirer, like Barclays does, like some of the French banks, where they still have their own bank acquirers. So that would happen. Now what you've seen over the last sort of 10, 15 plus years is you've seen more and more new entrants come in where they're not banks, but they're experts in payments. So their expertise, as you've said, Tony, it's very complex. So they've found a niche where some of the banks just don't have the investment or the technology or the know-how to fully invest everything from payments. So all of these new entrants have come into the space, and they can do one of two things. They could either say, we'll do all of your payments end to end, so we'll be your acquirer, your PSP, we'll do all your settlement, reporting, etc., or we'll just be your PSP, or we'll just be your acquirer. So what we're finding in that complex market is more and more choice. So for the merchants, there are now more choice than there's ever been about who can provide the right service, the right technology, the right infrastructure for their payments. And they can do it all through Worldpay or someone like us, or they can say, well, Worldpay, you can be my acquirer, but someone else, I'd like them to be my PSP. And that's what we're seeing in the industry, where what's happening across the industry and the amount of choice and innovation that's happening is that merchants have got more and more choice than ever.
It can be confusing. So in the Next Wave consulting business, we do some work for one of the UK's largest banks. And at the end of last year, they offered us a digital credit card in order to collect customer fees, which included the fees from themselves. And we had a bit of a head scratching moment on how this was going to work. It sounded like a early payment and a very low friction method. And then we realized that there was a servicing fee on it, which was about the same size as the early payment discount. So no such thing as a free service there. But we really had to think about, how does that work? I mean, we'll probably come back to digital credit cards in a minute, but let's well, that's quite a good segue actually into trying to understand what's going on in the sector. And with that context of a complex network, I know Worldpay do a benchmark. So you run a report, I think, annually. And I think in our research, you referred to this as the Payments Bible, and it's the 10th year that Worldpay have done this, and it's a big reference for everyone in the sector. So can you tell us a bit about that? And then maybe we can talk a bit about what the report is telling us this year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When I was saying to Tony, I didn't get a chance to show it to you, but that's the Global Payments Report. It is our Payments Bible, and we say that not because we say that, but a lot of our customers who download the report say that. The 10th year anniversary is about looking at the past, looking at the present, but also looking at the future. So for us, that report is really helping our merchants across 40 countries. So it gives them data of 40 countries of the right payment methods that they need to be looking at from an overall payment perspective. Which ones are going to work for their industry, which ones are growing, who's growing market share, etc. So really it's a report that helps us to educate our merchants. And then for merchants to download it, whether they're a customer of ours, they have access to that. So really, it's really changed in the 10 years that we've been producing it. We've also reflected quite a lot on some of the sort of predictions that we made back in those days around how cash would change, how cash would move out of society. We think things like buy now, pay later would take off. Some of our findings have come true, and some of them haven't. But in general, what we have seen is that trends are keep changing, and what's going on in the UK will not be the same as another country in Europe or another country in Latin America, because it's about what the consumer wants to use to pay.
Yeah, really insightful and useful to have that sort of central reference in this landscape. And for those of you who are on audio, well, you wouldn't have seen that, but it's quite a report. So the digital version that I've got on my screen runs to 83 pages. And I think the one that Pete was holding up looked like it weighed a kilo or two. So there's hopefully not too many paper copies out there, but it covers a lot. And I had a little flick through, and the headlines are, around, well, you said it, cash use declining, e-commerce volumes going up, apps, mobile embedded payment, digital cards, buy now, pay later, instant payments, and so it goes on. Anyway, you're the expert. So what are the trends for 2025? What are the signposts that are coming from the report?
Yeah, I mean, you sort of covered some of it, Tony, to be honest. But digital payments is continuing to change. And if we look at the UK, the value of e-commerce transactions that have been used by a digital wallet have quadrupled. So we're now the third country in Europe in terms of our percentage of volume of transactions behind Denmark and Norway. So we really have, people in the UK have really got hold of a digital wallet, and it's something that's been easier for them to use. And I think if you think about it, it was really accelerated by external factors that happened. Both with the pandemic, but then also some of the technology and the way that merchants introduced new forms of payment and new ways of paying when the pandemic was around. I mean, you can probably remember back to those gloomy days where you go to a restaurant and the waiter or waitress wouldn't want to necessarily come to you and take your order. So you'd scan, you'd get your phone out, you use a QR code, and then that payment was going off as an e-commerce transaction in the e-commerce world when actually you were face to face. And that's a really good example, I think, about how things have changed over the last 3 to 5 years. The other thing we've seen alongside digital wallets, and I mentioned it a few minutes ago, Tony, was the increase in growth of buy now, pay later. This isn't now just another form of payment. It's now in the UK represents 7% of transactions that happen in the UK. There was one of the companies last week announced they have 11 million customers now in the UK alone. People are getting more and more used to that as a payment method, and you're seeing more and more of our merchants having that as a payment mechanism online. So they'll have, Visa, MasterCard, Google Pay, Apple Pay, then they'll have a BNPL brand that's their preferred brand. So and PayPal, these are all their kind of brands that they've got on their payment page. And, whilst we're being driven by the technology, we're really being driven by the people. What do people want to pay with? What is the best for them to pay with? And that's not just the UK, that's everywhere that we're serving our clients. It's really two things. It's the technology, but it's also the people. What do the people want to use? What's the easiest form of payment for them? And what's the most frictionless? Because everybody is expecting that one-click checkout experience, a seamless experience. That's what people are seeing. That's what they're demanding. And so those are the kind of things that we're seeing across the evolution of payments.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In that example, 10 different ways to pay, almost. It's, there'll be more ways to pay than there are going to be products for some retailers. But this is all about, as you say, taking friction out and providing choice. Those consumer expectations around speed and convenience, can you talk a bit more about those? And I know Worldpay have been working on something as an instant payment mechanism as well. So perhaps you can touch on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, everybody wants everything done now at speed. And when it comes to payments, we're no different, right? So we do a lot of surveys across the whole industry. We go out to consumers, and we did some research in conjunction with Visa, and 83% of consumers, cardholders, whatever you would like to call them in this scenario, expect that one-click checkout experience. And so particularly when you're shopping online, you can see friction as a consumer, whether you've got a guest checkout, so you're there for the first time, you've got to create an account. That might be something that you don't want to do. So that is something that is there. Then you also see quite a lot of shop cart abandonment. So you'll see people putting things in their basket, they get distracted, or maybe they lose their phone signal, or maybe they've changed their mind. There's probably more often they've changed their mind, and it's sitting in their basket and the transaction's not being completed. So the partnership that we announced back in March with Visa is around enhancing our capabilities for our merchants with their solution, which is around click to pay. And really, Click to Pay is designed to solve some of the problems I talked about. So that abandonment and reducing abandonment, and then really just making it easier with one click. So what Click to Pay is really offering our merchants is that credential management of storage of information, Tony. So when you're out shopping online, we get offered the chance to pay with Click to Pay. We put in our credential details, so our card number, all those details. Or we've done that with the bank before, so we can also do it, register it with our bank. But we've put it in our details in. So then next time we go onto another website and they've got Click to Pay, you literally click that button and it takes you through to a one-click experience. So it reduces that need for you to get your card out again, remember those card numbers, entering all the details. So it's really improving that experience for the consumer and reducing that overall friction.
Yeah. When did you go live with that, Pete?
So yeah, we've just literally gone live over the last month with that, and we're in a now enabling that on our what we call our hosted payment pages, where we're taking control of the merchant's data. We're offering that to all of our merchants as another form of payment. And really, the way that we're positioning that to them is there isn't increased cost here for you. It's about reducing that abandonment, and it's helping to improve your acceptance rates, making sure that you get more and more transactions.
I'd appreciate that this has only really been live for a few weeks now, but what's the merchant adoption? What's the take up from the merchant side on this new offer?
Yeah, we've had a lot of positive reaction. We really have. I think anything that you can do in collaboration with the big brands, the networks, really gains that trust from the merchants. So lots and lots of interest. Merchants now signing up, putting it onto their payment pages, testing it. Both Visa and MasterCard are doing a really good job in working with the banks to make sure that consumers are aware this is a new way of paying. And they're also doing a really good job in getting the UK industry getting more familiar, so getting more and more merchants. Not everybody in the UK uses Worldpay, so it's important that many of our competitors, and partners are actually doing the same things as us, because once a consumer uses this kind of form of payment, the next website that they go to, they're going to want to use it again. So, really good interest. And as I say, whenever you do a collaboration like this with a trusted brand, it really helps.
And is the Click to Pay with Visa, is that a global thing or is that UK only at the moment?
At the moment, it's UK. We'll expand it into Europe. Obviously, the goal is for us to have that across all of our markets that we serve in, the 146. It will be fantastic over the next number of years that we can have that in all markets. Because, again, this is about, helping our merchants to reduce that overall abandonment and get as many sales as they can through. Because if they have a problem on their site and they go to a competitor, that's a lost sale for them. So our job is to really maximise their acceptance for them as much as possible.
And it's not the first time that you've built a collaborative service, built these connections, I think. I mean, I read that you had done something with MasterCard for travel agents. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So we announced last year, I think it was now, because time's going so quickly. But we announced last year a partnership with them around a virtual credit card. So this is around helping our travel companies, airlines with payments, because it's not a traditional like credit or debit card, Tony, as we would see it. It's literally that virtual card where you're given a BIN number, a card number for every single transaction that goes through. Really exciting collaboration with MasterCard that we announced. Again, we're looking to take that across new markets, go global with them. And for us, it's about making sure for our merchants we're offering them when it comes to payments, and we've talked about it quite a bit in terms of the complexity and how it's changing so much, so that when they think of payments, whether it be payments that they're taking in or payments that they're sending out, so that they can think of Worldpay as being able to provide all of that for them. So that's a key element for us in this partnership.
And just switching to an adjacent topic for a moment, when you're thinking about global footprint and you're thinking about and setting up services with the big brand payment networks, obviously money transmission, transfer of value is amongst many things, one of the transactional aspects that beyond all else needs to be secure, resilient, scalable and trusted. So I think in my perception of Worldpay and other firms like yourself who are payment service providers, that's really part of the network value. That's the PSP value. It's the resilient solution, trusted solution. This is always on. We keep reading about hacks that are happening out in the retail sector or banking networks that go down. So can you talk a bit about security measures? I mean, I imagine there's a huge amount of investment on the PSP side in making sure that these things all work.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's for us as an organisation, it's one of our top biggest focuses, right? We need to make sure, to your point, that we are a credible company that our merchants can rely upon to your point, keep their data, keep their information secure, make sure that our uptime, so that when they're processing a payment, they can rely on us. And, on that point, technology can let you down from point to point, but we have to provide a reliable and trustworthy service to our end merchants. Many of our companies that we work with will not be a single thread, so they will not rely 100% on one payment service provider. The more experienced companies will rely on 2, maybe 3, maybe in some cases they have over 10, because depending on the markets they're in. But when they do that, they make sure that they work with companies that are, really around being secure, trustworthy, having lots of different security protocols around their information, and being demanding. So many of our merchants are demanding of us. They want to make sure that our technology is reliable, that we're keeping the payment types up to date. If Visa or MasterCard are making a new mandate change, that we keep up to date with that. Lots of different things and lots of different expectations that our merchants have got from us.
Yeah, and we've talked about it on this show before with folks that are in the payment space. All of these things happening behind the scenes and not really visible until something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And then unwinding those situations is very difficult and often in the public eye as well, really hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about innovation. We've had a couple of examples, the Visa collaboration, the MasterCard collaboration. And for me, this comes back to culture and the people, because that's where the innovation stems from. Those are the folks that are building these amazing products and taking them to market. How do you foster innovation at WorldPay? What's your take on, the priority and the approach to innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing for us, Tony, is not doing any innovation in silo, right? So not for us thinking about what do we think that's good for the industry, but, taking into that, referring back to the 4-party ecosystem, even going that far back, what's important to the consumer, cardholder, customer? What's important to them? What's going to improve their experience and enable you and I, as those consumers, to spend our money more easily, make it more simple? We do that by doing our own reporting on what consumers want in our reports that we do, our surveys. Obviously, talking to merchants. So what is it that merchants are looking from us? What is changing in their point of sale environment, so their store, their footprint? What is changing? What are the consumers demanding? And then on an online scenario where they're not literally got any of that face time, any of that talk time, what experience are they looking to create in that environment? So when we're looking at innovation, we're taking all of the ecosystem, including the card schemes, where relevant. If it's not relevant, then we wouldn't include them. But in terms of, what is it from an innovation point of view is the people looking for? What is the ecosystem looking for? I think if you look at one really good example would be account-to-account transactions. So, we've been passing money between each other for years using our bank accounts. But how do we make that more of a peer-to-peer transaction? How do we make that more often? And how do we use account-to-account to pay a merchant for the transactions? So traditionally, I would have always used my credit debit card, my Apple Pay. Well, how about if I just use my bank account and make a new different type of transfer? And is that going to be easier, quicker for me as the consumer? And is it going to be good for the merchant? And that's a very good example, I think, of innovation that's come to the payment space over the last 5 years. We are seeing more and more growth in that area through account to account, particularly taking those rails away from peer-to-peer, but now for me to pay a merchant directly for those services. I mean, when I pay off my American Express personal card, I go onto their website and it takes me directly to my bank account, and makes me make a payment that way. Even I can still pay by debit card if I want to, but it's really promoting that bank-to-bank transfer. So you're seeing that account-to-account shift in innovation alongside the other things we said, Tony, about buy now, pay later and digital wallets. Those are the things. So, yeah, when it comes to innovation for us, it's about making sure that we're not having an inside view, but it's more of an external view about what's going on in the industry.
There's some nice examples there of the consumer-led innovation. And just unpacking that, when that then cascades to the Worldpay team, what proportion of the Worldpay team are technologists, and how do you work with your engineering teams to bring these sort of products to market quickly and
Oh,
safely?
wow. Yeah, great question. I wouldn't know the absolute accurate figure, but north of 30%, right, of our business is engineering, people doing coding on. But I see the people that are doing the coding as they're consumers, they're customers in their own right. So for us, when we're bringing a new item that we would, our merchants are asking for, the latest payment method in Brazil, the latest payment method in Australia, UK, for example, we need to make sure that they understand what the benefits that's going to bring to the consumers that are in that market. And so really, I think, if you think about people doing the engineering, it's getting them on side in terms of making sure we understand their roadmaps, what they're working on, making sure that fits into products are delivering the roadmaps, engineering and then delivering the code and making sure it's viable and can be integrated for all merchants. We work effectively in collaboration. So we'll take the merchant feedback. Our customer XYZ wants to go into this market. We know the payment methods that are viable in that market. We may have some, we may not have all of them. That we'll then work with product. So should we build that ourselves? Should we completely build that ourselves and own the entire infrastructure, or should we partner with someone? Has someone already got that API connected to their stack and they're connected to us? Does it make sense for us to do that full integration ourselves, or does it make more sense for us to do it through a third party? And then once we know, we'll then work with engineering to scope that out. How long is it going to take? How many sprints? In our business, we call them PIs. So how many PIs is it going to take? And then what are the priorities? What other priorities are we fighting off against that? If we do that, what does that mean we're going to drop over here? We don't have unlimited resources just like everybody else. You have to make priority calls, and those priority calls are made based on, the merchants and what they're asking for in the business case. What is a return on investment going to be? It's going to cost you, it's going to be 2 sprints of 2 teams, which is 20 plus people working on this code for 6 months. There's salary and costs there. So how much return on investment are we going to get by selling this product to our merchants? I would say in our organisation, particularly the last few years, it's become way more collaborative. And, to my point I made at the start, we need to remember that engineers are consumers, card holders themselves. So making sure that they understand that the product they're building for a particular vertical or a particular country is really going to make a difference. And it helps if they're a consumer of that product.
So I really like that, thinking of, recognizing that the engineering teams, that everyone, all the employee base are also the consumers. And it was quite clear there that this is a business-led approach, business sitting with engineering. I imagine there's probably quite a lot of competing priorities, though, because the amount of networks that you're on and the number of countries that you touch. So that sort of virtual whiteboard of what are we going to do next, I imagine might look quite interesting.
Yes, it is. And particularly for many of the teams that I run and lead, it can be quite frustrating because they obviously want to service every single client with every single payment method they can take and make sure they don't have to ask anybody else to do it. It's not that simple. So to my point, that's why we work with a lot of partners. So we make sure that we find the right partners that can help us with perhaps some of those payment methods in some markets that are important, but the volumes that we're going to see in those markets are going to be small. Doesn't make sense for us to build it ourselves. We can get much quicker, faster scale to market if we work through a partner. And then I think the thing, like in all business, Tony, if there's something you can't do, it's much better to be honest with the client. I was in the Middle East last week, as I said earlier. One of our customers is particularly keen on for us to get into 3 or 4 main countries in Africa. And how are we going to have the payment types in those countries? Now, the answer to some of that is yes, we will. Yes, we can do this. Yes, we can do that. But in their timescales, we're not going to fit everything. So our job in that scenario is to work with them and make sure we find the right partner for them. If we can't do it, we recommend someone that can. And then, that's about collaboration with them as a merchant and a collaboration with our partners. So we just have to be mindful with regret that we can't do everything for everybody, because as we've discussed on this call, payments is so complex, changing so quickly. And if you think you can do everything in every market, you're wrong.
That's a great lesson for everyone in whatever sector, that honest expectation setting, because there's nothing worse than pretending that you can bite off more than you can chew and
Absolutely.
make it all over the place. Okay, let's switch to looking forward for a few minutes, because we talked about the pace of evolution in the sector, and there's a lot on this in the report, in the payments report, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. So if folks want to get hold of a copy and take a look, then they can do that. But what are you seeing, and what perhaps would be your predictions for those who are in payments firms working with, or they're in corporate treasury space, and they're working in this space in the corporate sector? What are the things to look out for in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. Well, I think when you, from a corporate perspective, so anybody that's taking payments themselves, just making sure you're working with a forward-thinking payments partner, someone who's giving you the right advice on what's coming in the future, what they've got today, and being honest, to your point, Tony, about the capabilities they have got and the capabilities they haven't, because honestly, not everybody can do everything. So that's the first thing I'd give advice to. In terms of what's happening and what we're seeing changing, you've got things around crypto. Are we going to see more and more payments being made through Bitcoin? Are we going to see that as a seamless way of payment, having some forms of digital currency, optimizing that experience for merchants and their payment flows and how they move money around their business in all the countries they're in the world? So I think that's one to definitely watch out for. I think you're still going to see growth on account to account. You're still going to see growth on BNPL, and you're still going to see growth on digital wallets. Those things are here to stay. They're definitely going to be growing over the next few years. And in our report, as you've called out, we suggest that all of those three payment types are going to take more and more market share over the next 3 to 5 years. And then, how do we work with Visa and MasterCard? Again, I think whether it be Visa or MasterCard, American Express, Diners Discover, all those brands are completely relevant. Some of them are more relevant in some markets than others. And it's about making sure that your payments company that you're working with has got a good understanding of that. They've got a good understanding of what payment methods are going to be relevant for you in taking transactions, and trying to keep up to date with what's going on in the industry. As we've talked about on this chat, there's so much change going on in the industry. Sometimes you don't even know what's coming next. So I'm visiting Money 2020 in Amsterdam in June next month, and I'm really excited to see people talking on stage. CEOs of companies, what's coming next for them? What do they see is coming next? Because I guarantee you there'll be some surprises. There'll be some announcements that people weren't thinking about. And that's what makes the industry so interesting. So my main advice would be, read as much about what's going on in the industry as you can. There are so many different payments reports, payment podcasts, different things that you can listen to that are going to make a difference. Talk to people that are in the industry. Try and find someone who can support you and guide you on the journey of what's really happening, because that's something that's helped me in my career for sure.
Wow, a lot there. So thinking about who you partner up with and a number of ways to stay on the front foot with the sector evolution. I think showing up at real conferences is a good one, because during the pandemic, everything went online and it was like, is the conference industry going to go virtual? That's just not really the human social animal way to interact. And you can just get so much more by just visiting these events and just sort of soaking it all up. And it's hugely valuable to understand what's on the horizon or what's perhaps already here and listen to other people. Are you on stage at Money 2020 yourself?
I'm not this time. I was which will be a little bit more relaxing, Tony, I have to say. I was a couple of years ago. Really interesting topic. We were actually talking about account to account. So with one of the CEOs of one of the account to account companies, one of the card schemes. So this time it's more of to your point, it's more about networking for me. It's more about some meeting and greeting some people that I haven't met for quite a while. I've been in the industry 25 years, so I've got a lot of friends, but sometimes I don't see them very often other than speaking to them on LinkedIn and stuff like that. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to meet them. And then, meeting most of our partners. So all of our partners will be there right across the whole payments ecosystem. So I don't go to many conferences, but this is the one that I'd particularly look forward to because of the amount of payments knowledge and the fact that for 3 days you're going to learn probably more than you've learned in the previous 3 months.
It's going to be a busy week. And just looking to the other side of the payment space, so I was asking you there about those who are in the corporate payments sector, but the consumer, those of us who are still carrying credit cards, or are we?
Yeah.
What's over the horizon? What's arriving that's going to make life easier for the consumer?
Yeah, listen, I think for sure credit cards have definitely still got a role to play, right? More and more of us will start to leave them at home when we go out and we won't panic. More and more of us will leave them at home on purpose because we know we've got our phone. We're okay. And I think most people that I speak to, most of my friends that are not in payments, even now they say, well, as long as I've got my phone, I feel like I'm all right. So I think that's what we're going to see more of. But don't forget the digital wallets are all underpinned by a card, whether that be a debit card or a credit card, they're underpinned by a card. So card is still going to be around. We've still got some work to do, and we have to recognise that cash is still here. So in our report, we predicted that it will reduce to X%, and we were almost right in terms of where we got that number to. But it's still around. People in the UK in particular still rely on cash. There are a lot of jobs that still get paid in cash. And so we have to recognise that's still here, and we need to have a place for that. So I'm always an advocate when I see any type of retailer where they're saying card only, well, you're basically pushing away some consumers from your door. So you need to be really careful with that. Gone are the days now where you see cash only signs. Those days have gone, but you do sometimes see card only. And I think a lot of merchants need to be careful about that. So cash has still got a role to play. The UK is doing a great job in removing some of that by the digital wallets, the technology that we've had, the advancements since the pandemic. But we need to recognise it's still here. So nothing fundamentally changing, Tony. I think with the way that we do things, credit card, debit card will still be around. We may in the future just be given a number, and then we'll store that into our wallet and use it in that way. And then we'll use that for click to pay. We'll use that for all other transactions that we use from a wallet point of view.
But you're not predicting crypto only anytime soon?
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
And whilst on the topic of, disruption, so in this very complicated landscape and no doubt packed conference hall that you're going to be in next month in Amsterdam, where are you seeing the real innovation and disruption perhaps from some of these newer entrants to the market? What clever things are you perhaps seeing that are now being launched to either help the merchant side or the consumer side of the
the reality is you, in your opening point, I think, Tony, at the start, when you talked about how many different payment service providers there are, and I was speaking to one of the card schemes about it about a month ago, about how many PSPs have come to life in the last 3 years. So it's exciting to see that in terms of the amount of innovation that is coming. But I'd also argue some of the market's quite saturated. So if you're going to launch a PSP with a certain one type of new payment method that you think is going to revolutionise the payment experience, you're probably wrong now, because you need to be able to offer a broader breadth, because that's what the merchants are expecting. There are a number of really cool companies that have started in the last 3 or 4 years that are going to be successful for the long term. There are a number, sadly, that are running out of cash because their business plan, what they had focused on, wasn't quite right. It was quite limited in how many types of businesses they could win. But I think you're seeing more and more investment in account to account, in crypto payments, what's going to happen in those spaces. So I think people in those industries are probably going to win. They need to make sure they get the right VC funding, right investment. They've got a long-term business case. They can see a trajectory where they're going to start making some money and profit for the shareholders that are bought into that company. But I think we're probably going to see in the Money 2020 some new organisations come into market. I think that one of the latest things we've seen, Tony, is something called an orchestration layer. So there are more and more orchestration companies that have come to the payments arena the last 3 to 5 years. And what they do is they sit as a layer that connects into the merchant, and then they'll connect to all the PSPs, acquirers underneath. So they then optimize their acceptance rates, their cost, everything like that. So we're seeing more and more of these orchestration layers, but some that are focused on individual verticals, some that are focused on individual markets, and it's who of those is going to win over the next 3 years that I think is going to be quite interesting for us to watch.
Yeah, that is interesting. So we had account to account there and orchestration layers and crypto payments. So a few things to watch out for. That's probably content for at least a few more episodes of the London Fintech Podcast. So I'm all set. We're going to run out of time. So just to wind it up, and I always ask this, I used to ask people what they're reading, and then I realized that people do more listening than reading these days, and quite a lot of watching as well. But anything that's on your playlist?
I'm a big, I love listening to music, so I've got to be honest, that's my sort of downtime, Tony. When I'm on the train, I love listening to all sorts of different types of music. From a podcast point of view, I like listening to some of the business ones. I also like listening to some of the sport ones. So the ones that Sky Sports do are fabulous for me. So they also make me laugh when I'm listening on the train. And then I have never been a particularly great reader of books. And I've tried to make it my thing over the last 12 months to that I would get a book and I would read it. So I am reading a really good book at the moment. It's more of a fiction book. So to be honest, I haven't read it for about 5 days. So I can't even remember the name of it. But I also took a book away from my visit in the UAE about basically the person that's been running the whole of the UAE for the last, I think it's like 50 plus years now. So that book will be really interesting to read because he's gone on a fantastic journey of growing the UAE from nothing to where it is today. So a bit of variety, not one person, I just read books or I just listen to music. I just decide really on how I feel from that day-to-day perspective. So I'm definitely not the best person to give any advice on books.
But there's a bit of everything there. It's the same in my house. You know, we buy a book for my son for holiday. He decides he doesn't like it, and I end up reading it, or at least I read a bit of it until something else happens, and then I have to put it down. So I'm sort of halfway through about 4 different books at the moment as well.
Good, you made me feel better.
So for anyone who wants to find out more about Worldpay or get in touch with you, Pete, where do they go?
For me, just follow me on LinkedIn. I'm there. You can reach out to me direct, send me a direct message. Very happy to help. Worldpay, it's worldpay.com. Everything is on there that you can need to see. If anybody needs any help from a corporate perspective, reach out to me. I'll put you in contact with my team. But yeah, I'm on social quite a bit. I publicised about my trip to the Middle East last week because I was with a few people, colleagues from my business, and they also posted. It was such an amazing trip. But yeah, very happy for people to reach out and connect with me, and hopefully they found some of this content interesting and useful for them.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they will. And LinkedIn's fast become the place to learn about not just someone moving job, but research, insight, and all sorts of things. I've got one, I think I mentioned this before, I've got one academic on my network who said that he used to write papers, but now he publishes on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So
not a surprise.
Look, thank you again for your time. Great conversation. And as I said, something there for everyone, I think. So we'll leave it there. We'll put a couple of links in the show notes, and wishing you a very productive rest of the week.
Yeah, great. Thanks ever so much, Tony. Great to speak to you.